Congressman Kevin Yoder from Kansas's 3rd District, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for coming by.
For starters, can you tell us a little bit about your district and the kinds of agriculture we might find in it?
Well, I represent the 3rd District of Kansas, which I think is the best district in America. It's really very diverse. It's got a heavy urban area, suburban area, and rural, really all three, which represents the vast diversity of the country right here in my district. A lot of farmers, but not as much as the rest of the state. Of course, big 1st District has 60+ counties. They produce a lot of wheat. We do a lot of agribusiness. We have a lot of different meat products. We got a lot of different equipment companies, folks that their life and their success is built around the success of agriculture. And of course, all my constituents, they buy groceries and they depend upon Kansas farmers to put food on their table, as do people all across the world.
Now, you serve on the House Appropriations Committee, and it's a committee you've served on really since you came to Washington. I'm wondering how you've seen that committee and the conversations that you have within that committee evolve as you've seen Congress change, as you've seen now the White House change. How have conversations within the Appropriations Committee changed?
Well, I serve on the Agriculture Appropriations Committee, and so in particular, we're focused on investment in agriculture research, keeping important programs like crop insurance, which we saw the president make reductions to in his budget, which we saw the previous president make reductions to in his budget as well. So, on the committee, we're always defending our investments in agriculture and in farmers. But, the committee as a whole, our goal is to reduce spending, work to balance the federal budget while investing in priorities that make a difference in our lives and our constituents' lives across the country. It's a tough task. This country spends, almost $4 trillion annually. And we, are spending a lot of money on things that hopefully we could reduce. But one thing we got to ensure is that we keep funding strong for things like crop insurance, programs that we made commitments to farmers to ensure that they can continue to invest, take risk, and feed the world.
Now, serving on the Appropriations Committee is something that typically happens after someone's got a term or two under their belt in Washington. Was it any added difficulty, coming right to Washington in your first term? You're being kind of thrown right to the funding wolves, so to speak?
Yeah, I had served on the Appropriations Committee in the Kansas State House and was chairman my last term, so I had some experience running a budget, although there we deal with billions, millions and billions. Here we deal with millions, billions, and trillions. So, we add some zeros, but the concept is still the same. People get up each day in this country, they work hard to pay their taxes, they send that money to the government, and they expect that we are good stewards of those taxpayer dollars because we're essentially spending their hard-earned labor. And so I've always treated it like it was not the government's money, but the people's money, and we were trying to spend as little as possible. And that's the attitude I took when I was in the legislature. We had to make some tough decisions. When I came to Washington, D.C., we were on the cusp of huge deficits, $1.5 trillion annually. And we needed, I think, people who had experience and had the ability to get in and cut spending. And so we did that. We're still spending less in many areas today than we were when I came into Congress 7 years ago. And so that fiscal discipline has been a critical part of my job. And I've really enjoyed serving on the committee. It's been the great thing about being on appropriations is you really touch all corners of government. So every law that's on the books, every agency, every purpose of government that gets carried out has to be appropriated, has to have funding. And so whether it's our national defense or whether it's agriculture or financial services or education or medical research or you name it, we have an opportunity to address a lot of those issues. And so you really get to be engaged in a number of things that affect your constituents.
And before your time in Congress and the legislature and college, Kansas farm kid.
Kansas farm kid. I grew up on a small farm in the middle of Kansas, actually near a little town called Yoder, Kansas. It was a grain and livestock farm. Growing up, we had all sorts of livestock from cattle to hogs and sheep and chickens, the whole 9 yards. And then, of course, we had wheat, corn, soybeans, and milo. So it's a farm that's been in my family for a couple generations. My dad still farms sort of part-time today. And so growing up on a farm, you learn a lot about the agriculture values, hard work, determination, living off the land. It's a very peaceful and existence, but it's a very hard life. And so when I'm up here in Washington, I never forget the farmers that are working to put food on the table for Americans across the country, farmers who are in the field sweating, bringing in the crops, dealing with tough commodity prices, dealing with expensive inputs and fuel and all that they have to worry about the weather. I mean, it's a tough occupation, but it means a lot to me, and I believe those values are the bedrock of what makes America such a strong country. I will say, when I first got elected to Congress, my father came up to see me sworn in, and he's farmer, had to go out and buy a new suit, and it was probably the most prideful moment I had, not just getting to Congress, but having my father, lifelong farmer, in the audience, seeing his son get sworn into Congress. It was a really cool moment. And afterwards, I asked my father, have you been to Washington, D.C. before? When was the last time you were here? And he said, well, yeah, the last time I was here was in 1978 when I drove my tractor from my farm and parked it on the mall. And so advocacy for farmers has been in my family as much as farming has been in my family for a long time.
As you work your way around Washington, talking with either your fellow lawmakers, maybe folks trying to influence those fellow lawmakers, do you come across many people that have that direct production agriculture background like you do?
Well, I think a lot of us maybe go back 2 or 3 generations, but and we certainly have farmers that are in Congress that are still farming today. But less and less people are working on farms. More and more of them live in the cities, live in the suburbs, in the urban area, and so I think we're all connected some point in our history to agriculture. But it is a smaller group that themselves grew up on a farm, that understands those values, that has that appreciation. So for me, it's a very special part of my childhood. It's a very special part of who I am. I've always believed that you never forget who you are or where you've come from. And so those farming roots, they carry with me every single day here. And frankly, I think it's an advantage I have over many of my colleagues because I have an appreciation for the fabric of our country.
Now it's more and more, as we see across the country, the way congressional districts are being drawn, there's fewer that are considered to be farm districts.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more urban land, and your district might fall into that category as well. So how do you think urban lawmakers, folks with more urban than rural land in their districts, how do you think they should approach agriculture policy and really farm programs in general on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think they should look at it, one, from a historical perspective, that farmers are a critical part of what has made America strong, and that we don't want to lose our small rural towns because that is part of our fabric. And so I think they should consider the heart and soul of the country. I also think they should think strategically when it comes to national security. We don't want to be reliant on other countries to get our food supply. We want to be able to grow the food here, to feed Americans, and we feed the world. They can also think about our charitable contributions. Speaking of feeding the world, we send grain to Africa and all around the world, helping feed needy and hungry folks. And I think ultimately what they can think about is they want good quality products in their supermarkets to feed their constituents. Because no matter whether you're in urban or suburban or rural, everyone has to put good food on the table. And it's Kansas farmers that are feeding 100 plus of those folks. Each farmer is feeding 100 and some families every single year with their work, and so that matters to them, even if they don't have farmers in their district.
So you think the lawmakers that may not have a farm in their district, or maybe even some states that don't have a very high level of agricultural production, do you think they still have the obligation to understand things like food production, like crop insurance, like the farm programs that are funded in the Farm Bill and more broadly through Congress?
They do, and I have a commitment to and an obligation to try to educate them as well, as someone who comes from that part of the world. But I think a lot of them understand. I think they care. It is getting harder, I think, as more people don't come from a farm or don't represent farmers. I think that challenge, that gap grows wider. So we have to redouble our efforts. But I think most members of Congress still understand that this is who we are, that we can't lose this agrarian base, that farmers don't ask for much. During the last budget debates, a lot of them came into my office and said, we don't need direct payments. We don't need a lot of the subsidies. We just want to make sure that our risk is protected. When I put my entire life savings and all of my resources into our spring crop, and it gets hailed out, or it's a drought or too much rain, there's a combination of things. I want to know that I'm not going to be wiped out. The bankers come in and say, look, we can't lend to farmers unless we have these sorts of programs in place. And so most of them, if you explain how it works and they understand that, it's important. But you're right, there are a number of lawmakers here who don't get it and have not been helpful. And that's part of the struggle we have, is making sure farmers are properly represented here in Washington, D.C.
Let's shift gears and talk about you personally. When you're off the clock, so to speak, as scarce as that might be, right. What are some things that you enjoy doing back home in Kansas?
Well, my absolute favorite thing to do is to hang out and spend time with my 2 little girls and my wife, our family. I have 2 girls, one is 3 and one is 1. And so we have a lot of fun. We go to the pool, we play in the backyard, try to teach them things. And so it's amazing when you have children, your greatest joy in life just is hanging out and spending time with your kids. Of course, I like to barbecue. I'm a good Kansas Citian. We have the best barbecue in America in Kansas City. So I like to put on a slab of ribs or, maybe some pulled pork or, brisket, maybe, if I'm really trying to up my game. But
what's your specialty?
My ribs are pretty good.
Yeah?
Ribs are pretty good. I've got a spicy honey mixture that's kind of spicy sweet that has kind of a crowd favorite. But I love to cook. I love to spend time just cooking for my family, hanging out in the summer in the backyard, and of course love to play tennis. Love to get out, maybe play a little golf, do lots of things. But hard to find time for those hobbies these days. Between work on behalf of my constituents, spending time with the family makes a pretty full week, and it's a great week at that.
There's a lot of lawmakers that have children, but very few of them are 3 and 1 years old.
Right.
Do you think that gives you a different perspective from your colleagues?
Well, I certainly understand what working families are going through as they're trying to make ends meet, and they're trying to take care of childcare and be there for their children when mom and dad are both working full time. My wife works full time as well, and so we understand the struggle that families have when they're burning the candle at both ends. We also understand the importance of education and investing in the future. I want my 2 little girls to have every opportunity I had and more. I want to make sure they go to great public schools. I want to make sure they have opportunities to go to college, to have great jobs in this country. And so one of the challenges Congress has is, the House is up every 2 years. So Congress tends to focus on the now as opposed to the future. I've been really trying to focus as one of the younger members who has a young family. How can we look at our national debt long term and not pass that on to our kids? How are we investing in the right things that might make sure that they have the same opportunities we had and even greater? Just really preparing for the future. I think it really helps. But more than anything, having a couple kids, it keeps you young, it keeps you humble, and helps you, I think, really focus on what matters.
Congressman Kevin Yoder from Kansas' 3rd District, thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you for having me.